of the sign or the property owner. Signs that do not require a permit at this time is one national, state, or local governmental flag properly displayed upon a single flag pole, one flag or pennant not exceeding 24 square feet, not containing a commercial message and hung from a pole attached to a residence, temporary non-commercial signs under 5 square feet in size. Those are the typical signs you see on a stick. They're about 2 by 3 in size. That are considered most temporary. No trespassing signs, parking restriction signs, and no dumping signs not exceeding 3 square feet in area. On-site directional signs upon a single site, and window signs not exceeding 50% of the window area of any window. And it does have some language in there regarding establishments with certain time periods and any stores that have cash handling or areas similar where public safety would be a factor. The application process for the city. We do require a drawing to scale showing the design of the sign, including dimensions, size, colors, materials, method of attachment, source of illumination, and showing the relationship to any building or structure to which it's proposed to be installed or affixed to. A photograph showing the proposed location on the existing elevation of the building is helpful and recommended. A site plan, including all dimensions drawn to scale, indicating the location of the sign relative to the property line, the right-of-way, street sidewalks, vehicular access points, and existing buildings or structures and off-street parking areas. The number, size, type, and location of all existing signs on the same building site or premise, and proof of consent of the property owner or the person in control of the property if the applicant is not the property. Increasing that allows the increase of wall sign letter height, additional 8 inches, an increase in the number of lines of text in a wall sign to 2 or more, an increase in ground size area up to a maximum of 40 square feet per face and 80 square feet total for centers larger than 3 acres, increase in ground sign height to 8 feet in commercial centers containing 5 or more tenants, or in larger commercial centers where visibility constraints justify monument signage as opposed to pylon signage. Increase in ground size area for larger centers or where visibility constraints justify monument signage as opposed to pylon signage. And an increased total wall sign area up to 20 square feet for second floor businesses facing a street or highway. For Planning Commission and enhanced signage, the Planning Commission can approve an application if it finds the conditions applicable to the property involved, including the size, shape, topography, structure, setback, location, or surroundings do not generally apply to the surrounding properties in the same zone. And in addition, the Planning Commission must find that all proposed enhanced signage meets these following criteria, which complies with the applicable design guidelines, would not interfere with pedestrian and vehicular safety, would not be located to have a negative impact on the visibility or aesthetic appearance of any adjacent property, would not detract from pedestrian quality of the street or area, would not add or create an over proliferation of signs on a particular property, and would enhance the overall. We do have site restrictions, which the site should be the sign should be located on the same site as the use they identify or advertise, except off-site directional signs, temporary subdivision signs, public interest signs, open house signs, and temporary political signs. We also have some language addressing the illumination requirements, construction, letter sizing, and back support, which would be how the sign itself is supported. Maintenance regarding all signs, they shall be maintained in good repair. Display surface of all signs kept clean, neatly painted, and free from rust, cracking, peeling, corrosion, or other states of disrepair. And the exposed back of any sign must be suitably covered. So other specific signage that is listed in the code that is specifically called out and has some language attached to it or some type of direction that helps staff in that sign review is off-site directional signs, roof signs, subdivision signs, temporary construction signs, public interest signs, open house signs, and temporary non-commercial signs. And then the one we'll probably see the most of moving forward are non-conforming signs. I do have a special slide on the non-conforming signs because they will and probably are the most highest amount of signage we probably have in town. Our municipal code states that a non-conforming sign is any advertising structure or sign which was lawfully erected and maintained prior to the adoption of these regulations and is subject to these regulations but does not comply completely. We do allow modifications on non-conforming signs. The first modification allowed is changes in sign copy, which is basically replacing out the inside of the sign or the core of the sign. If they're just changing maybe the name of the business or updating their phone number or something like that, you can change out the face. And modifications that reduce the extent to which the sign does not comply with the chapter. We also have a process in the municipal code dealing with the recording or the documentation of non-conforming signs, which establishes creating a list, and then we mail out notices to those property owners or businesses that have those signs. And the code does consider them non-conforming for a 5-year period in which the city has to give a specific deadline for when that sign is no longer non-conforming. And then in the event that it is not removed, the city can move forward with either its removal or consider it abandoned and remove it at that time. We do also have a violation process listed in the municipal code. It's very rare that the city moves forward with the violation process at this time regarding signage. We typically either contact the property owner directly or send them a letter advising. But our municipal code does say that each sign found to be in violation constitutes a separate violation. The city planner or the representative may remove any sign located upon and affixed to any public property in violation. The city must give notice of the removal of the sign to the sign owner, stating the location of the sign and the procedure for retrieving it. And then any unlawful sign removed shall be retained for a period of at least 10 days, during which the owner of the sign can come and retrieve it. The sign upon payment of all removal costs or an administrative fine in the amount of $50, whichever is greater. Any person desiring, and we also have an appeals process for that as well, in which any person desiring to contest such payment may request a hearing before the city manager, who has authorization to waive the payment if it's determined that the sign was not in violation. And the decision at this time of the city manager is final. So this is our common signage, the signage that is most common in the city at this time. We've got business frontage signs, which are a portion of the building which faces the street, parking lot, pedestrian mall, arcade, or walkway. The primary business frontage is one which contains a customer entrance, etc., and it's usually permanent. Non-conforming, which is any advertising structure or sign which it was lawfully erected or maintained, as we discussed prior, subject to these regulations, but maybe doesn't completely comply. Temporary signs, which are constructed of either cloth, canvas, light fabric, cardboard, wallboard, wood, or other light materials with or without frames, intended to be displayed for a limited period of time. Portable signs, which include our A-frames, most popular, which are intended to be moved or capable of being moved, whether or not on wheels or other special supports. This also includes placards and banners. Directional, and we've got on-site and off-site directional, which are not bearing of any advertising message and readable from a street right-of-way, which is to direct and control pedestrian or vehicular traffic. And then we've got freestanding signs, which are supported by one or more upright poles, columns, braces, and placed in or on the ground and not attached to any building or structure. So in past discussions between the Planning Commission and staff, which we did discuss this a few years ago when it was becoming an issue, and then time has just gotten behind us here, Staff had come to Planning Commission, originally advised that there was an increase of unpermitted A-frame signs being placed along McHenry Avenue, Highway 120, and Main Street. We are also seeing an increase in directional signs being placed quite a distance away from businesses that which they pertain to. Many of these signs, if not majority of the signs, did not have permits, or permits were not being obtained for signage, and multiple commercial signs located throughout town for the same business. At that time, through the Planning Commission feedback, a lot of things were discussed. One was requiring A-frames to be sturdier, less flimsy, and have clearer requirements or a checklist. There was a dislike of signs being located blocks away from the actual business. We also discussed, or it was brought up, rentable yard sale signs, or a universal yard sale sign that maybe the city creates and people pick up and use. That way we don't have multiple colors, multiple sizes all over town. Issues with all non-conforming signs and the staff time that it will take to obtain the compliance. Making sure that if we were moving forward with obtaining compliance, that enforcement was applied equally to all businesses. A suggestion was community boards located in several locations where people could post their garage sales and business advertisements. And then we talked about adding a section, which we also discussed at another time, for murals into the municipal code. Other feedback and the direction that city staff was looking to go forward with was educating businesses of the sign ordinance regulations by providing courtesy notices and sharing regulations on Facebook, website, newsletter, creating simple checklists, improving requirements for the A-frame signs to include size, distance from business, and how to properly secure them, adding that section on the murals, and then adding a section specific to election signs, which was something that staff is interested in doing, just to make it more clear in the future during election times for signage. So the next steps listed was to have feedback given to the city and the Planning Commission regarding how the business owners would feel about signage, or any ideas they may have, any concerns they have about their current signage or proposed signage in the future, discuss ideas, identify areas that may need to be changed or updated. Oops. So it is a workshop. I know we've got a good half hour left, so that's actually more than I thought we would have. And we do have this item listed at 7 o'clock for more discussion. And so if there's anybody on the line that is a business owner or somebody in town that has any feedback or comments, if you could please just identify yourself, name, business if you're interested, or address, and just tell us whatever feedback or concerns you have. And that would be great.
I don't know if everybody can hear me. I'm Marion Van Vliet from Escalon Covenant Church. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, we're in the process of renaming our church, so our sign is going to change. And as I'm looking at the guidelines, I'm not real clear on what we are allowed for a sign. We have 350 feet of frontage, so if you go by your recommendations, we can have a 350 square foot sign. Which we obviously would not do, but where is there a place where there's maximum sign limits?
So there isn't a maximum size limit. There's a table located in the municipal code in that section that actually takes the sizing of the sign in relation to the zoning that it's located in, and you kind of basically have to calculate it out. So in that circumstance, what we typically like to tell people to do is to propose the sign that the way they want it, so that we can identify what meets the code and what doesn't, and then we move forward with the applicant to assist in trying to either bring the sign into conformance by identifying what needs to be addressed, Or at that time, because the code does allow going to planning commission, if you need enhanced signage and would meet that requirement, we could move it forward to the planning commission for review to obtain that approval.
Okay, all right.
So that is a lot easier. That way it kind of puts it on staff to go ahead and do that for you, because it does get a little confusing if you're not used to doing it. Of course, we would love for people to be able to do it, but when we review it, it's easier, instead of having two people to do it, for us to do it for you, and then we can give you feedback, and we're really good about that.
Okay, sounds good. And then, we have I think an issue with the South San Joaquin Irrigation District, or the line goes in front of our facility, and so you can't build on top of that. Is that correct? It says, I forget where it was. It says somewhere in there you can't construct on top of public right-of-ways.
Yes, and so SSJID does have easements, and their regulations are typically that they don't allow structures or buildings to be constructed over their easements. And so if you already have an existing sign in that area, we would typically let the applicant know that they should contact SSJID directly, and see if they could maybe obtain something from them that allows, or some type of permission from them that they're okay with you replacing out the sign or putting the sign in that area. If that doesn't occur and you do apply and it's in the easement, what we would typically do is, knowing that that easement is there, is we would contact SSJID directly and see if they had any feedback or comments on it. And it just depends. Some of the easements are active, some of them are inactive. Sometimes it just depends on where the easement's located and whether or not it's active or not.
Okay. Well, it's within the easement, but it's not on top of the pipeline.
Yeah, and I mean, and that might be something where you can apply to us as is, and we can follow up with SSJID and see if it's something that they would be willing to work with. But then if it's not, then we would notify you or let you know that they are not allowing that in the easement.
So is it best to go through you first, or can we contact the irrigation district ourselves initially?
Either or, whichever one, if you're comfortable or you know somebody that works there, you can contact them directly and obtain a letter. If not, and you applied without that information, we would follow up on that on our end.
Okay, makes sense.
Marion, this is Barb Willis talking. There is science out there to tell you about signage, what size the lettering should be, and how far from the road it should be, dependent upon the speed of traffic on the road. So you might be able to look at some of that before you put a proposal forward for your sign.
Where did you see where it has, how far from the road?
Well, we did this workshop in 96 and 97, and I have expert handouts from that time. And I could certainly show it to you, and maybe there'll be some information we could pursue that's more current, but there still is that guidance out there for that.
There are some general requirements that are listed in there for whichever zoning you are located in, and that might or might not apply to whatever type of sign it is you're proposing. And so we could look at that. I'm not sure if the worksheets Barbara has are current or not, because our municipal code states that the code was last updated in 2005, so I'm not sure if anything has changed since then. But staff at our level as well, if you bring something in, I mean, we're willing to sit down and review that stuff with you, and that's our job. You know, you're turning in that application. There is a sign fee that goes along with it, and that's our job, is to go ahead and review that for you and let you know what areas it doesn't meet and how you could go about correcting that or adjusting.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because I didn't see anything in there about a setback from the road. It mentioned 10 feet on something, but it had to do with more signs on a building versus out on the landscape.
Yeah, we'd have to just look into it and find out. And I'm not even sure which zone you are. Some of the churches in town are in the commercial zone. Some of them are in residential. I'd have to look at that at first. I'm not sure what zone you're even in at this point.
Oh, okay. So then this table wouldn't pertain if we're residential?
It just depends. The table itself has has both residential and commercial and industrial signage in there, so we would go off of zoning first and then follow through the chart and then review the rules. So it's just a little process.
Okay. I'm good.
Thanks, Marin.
Dominique, what is the sign application fee?
The fees have just increased July 1st. I'm not sure whether that fee application was on there or not, but it's about $150. It
So-
might be a little more now, but it's usually around $150.
I'm not trying to be negative Nancy by any means about this, because I remember when we brought it up at the planning commission and we talked about how there are signs that are located blocks away from the businesses. But, and I'm probably gonna sound like a few city council members when I say this, but it's almost to the point where a sign ordinance and having very strict regulations on signage almost takes away the small town feel of Escalon. And I guess where I'm going with this is the new ordinance is so restrictive, it actually creates government regulations on a town with 7,000 people. And I'm not really in favor of that, because of that reason. I mean, it's getting so restrictive that we're saying, okay, well, if you're gonna do a yard sale, you know what? You need to come to City Hall and pick up a yard sales template so that you can advertise your yard sale.
So just to be
And-
clear on that item, that was just a discussion item that we talked about when we talked about signage. That's actually not in the municipal code. We don't really have regulations on that, except for the fact that it's temporary and should be taken down after the event and not put in the public right of way, which most people like to put it in the right of way because they're trying to get that attention off the highway or attention off the area. And so at this point, we don't charge a fee for yard sales, and that's not something we're actually doing. I think that was something that was brought up at the meeting a few years ago in an attempt to make a universal sign so that it's similar in size, similar in color, similar in language, and so it doesn't, I guess, look as messy as it might look. And we go through ups and downs. I mean, right now, we're not really seeing a lot of garage sales or yard sales because of the time of year being hot, you know, and with the COVID stuff that's going on. But there are times where it spikes and you get a lot of them, and then there's times where none of them are happening. And so I just think that was a suggestion. It's not actually what's in the code at this time.
I understand. I am concerned that we're putting more restrictions and more regulations on our residents. And is it truly necessary? That is where I'm going. I mean, tell me, the signs right across from Marion's church right now that are advertising the graduates, would those be considered non-compliant with the current sign ordinance?
Those would be more along the lines of temporary. So no, they didn't pull a permit on it, but the schools are actually separate from us in regulation on their property as well. They usually go through the state for building permits. I'd have to check and see whether signage permits are something they'd come to us for. But yeah, I mean, given the situation, obviously, we're going through a first-time pandemic, you know, where obviously the city's not trying to enforce those, you know, or say anything about those, given the circumstances. So that's kind of a special case on its own. But yeah, typically, according to code, they would be temporary signs that would probably be limited, you know, to a few weeks or 30 days is usually what we see as temporary.
I guess my point in all of this is that, you know, if people want to put up signs about, you know, trying to rally the community together, the last thing we need is putting signs up like, you know, take care of Escalon, take care of your neighbors, love your neighbors. And next thing we know, the city's coming along behind and saying, well, you didn't comply with the recently adopted sign ordinance from the city, so therefore we're going to take it down. and I think there is an element that is lost in this sign ordinance, that you're losing the small town feel of Escalon. Now, granted, we don't want it to be so that you drive through down 120 and it looks like a billboard or a billboard every 2 feet that you go.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, is it really that big of a problem? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and
I'd like
it's
to
something that we
follow up.
just, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'd like to follow up on what Sean said. We were lenient with signs when the times were tough. I'm not sure we should end the leniency because of the pandemic. Like a sign that is terribly non-conforming that says all these businesses in this shopping center are open right now, it might not even apply tomorrow. Several businesses that might be existing right now, they might be abandoned more or less, and then their signs would be abandoned. It seems like we need to be forgiving. And how long is this process do you see taking as far as redoing the sign ordinance? Dominique, do you see weeks, months?
I mean, and
Does
so
the council
we could,
want it at a certain time?
yeah, I mean, and so it could take weeks, it could take months, it just depends on what direction that the planning commission wants to go, and it is Title 17, so it would come to the planning commission for amendments first, and then the planning commission would provide recommendations to the council, and then the council would review it. Both times would require a public hearing, so that would be advertised in the newspaper. I mean, but as far as effectiveness, as long as it's written in the ordinance when we'd want it to go into effect, we can schedule it to go into effect January of next year. We can do July 1st of next year, have it adopted and ready to go, but then have the effective date. And maybe in the meanwhile, we work with businesses or we contact businesses and we try to, you know, provide that information or figure out how we want to go about dealing with non-conforming or what signs. I mean, it's basically up to the planning commission and the council. If you want less regulation in your ordinance and certain signs to be exempt or provide additional flexibility, you know, the ordinance is ordinance, so maybe we go and we simplify it and make it very basic, and then we come back to this 5 years later and we think this is not strong enough. Maybe we need to put a little bit more restriction in it. We can always amend it again. Or, you know, backwards.
I feel bad for the people. Yeah, I feel bad for the people who've been complaining and upset about signs.
Yeah, we haven't had any recent complaints, and that's because we really have only been dealing with ones that are a health and safety issue, with whether it be blocking the sidewalk or blocking visibility issues. The other complaints that we've had regarding signage have been, you know, businesses wanting to put multiple signs throughout town to advertise their business. So you're driving down the 120 and they want to be able to put, instead of just 1 or 2 directional signs or signs advertising their business off-site from their location, they want to put, you know, 5 or 6 or more than that all the way down the 120 leading up to their business or something like that. And then we also had one that was interested in putting a vinyl banner on the rooftop, and our code does have specifics regarding roof signage. And the code looks at it as wanting to use durable materials, so, you know, maintenance-wise, you don't have to keep replacing it and taking care of it in that fashion. But then their argument was, it's easy to replace and low maintenance. So I would rather, you know, throw a banner up there and replace it out every few months when it gets worn out than, you know, invest a lot of money into this sign on the roof, you know, and then have to replace it every few years. And I mean, it's just a preference at that point. So even if we were to look at the code and allow, you know, certain things or exceptions on certain types of signage, like banners and streamers and flags, those are the most common you see. They're the ones that are actually prohibited in the code, which are the ones that try to grab people's attention, are the ones that are actually prohibited. So maybe, and it's only a suggestion, maybe we allow them but limit them on how many can be allowed or can be present. That way you're not, you know, because you have to, and it's a planner's perspective. And I know, you know, it's an extreme case, but it's much like we talked about in other situations like the ADUs. You have to put it in your mind that every business in town, when they see what one is doing, they're going to do the same thing. And so if everybody moves forward and everybody does that same thing, that's the result we'll get, you know, is a ton of flags and signs all in the same area, and especially if you're looking at your shopping centers. And then that's where it might become an issue where we have to go and enforce.
So,
Rare, but still possible.
Dominique,
Thank you.
Yes.
as always, I appreciate the effort that you and Diana put together in writing out the revisions to the sign code. But the fact of the matter is, businesses are struggling to survive these days. The last thing we want to do is start hammering them, even if we do it a year from now and say it's not effective until July of 2021. You know, businesses are having a really difficult time trying to get foot traffic into their businesses. And, I mean, for any businesses. And my fear is that through the latest shutdowns that we may lose some businesses here in Escalon that have been around for a long time. And so, candidly speaking, I don't necessarily believe that right now is the appropriate time to discuss a revision to the sign ordinance, given the current conditions, given the current business conditions that we're dealing with here in Escalon and throughout California. And I'll just let that alone.
Okay.
I have another question. We had a fireworks booth this year. Well, of course, obviously there's 4 of them in town. How does this all apply to the fireworks stands? I mean, I had a feather flag out front of the church. I had an open sign. I had a sign at the corner in front of Midstate, or the True Value store there on the corner. I tried not to block the parking lot, but just trying to get people's attention. So it seems like I was in violation probably on all 3 signs when I look at it. That's the last thing I want to do, is obviously be in violation.
Yeah. And so, Diana, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but when it comes to the fire booths, I mean, we see that as a local event, you know, that's generating monies for either nonprofits or the schools or clubs, and that are partaking in that function. And so, for the most part, I mean, we know it's temporary. We know the booths are just there for the 4th of July. We're pretty hands-off in that area, recognizing that it's for the community. Do you have anything to add to that, Diana?
No, I think you nailed it. The key is that it's temporary. I mean, the fireworks booths only go up, a week and a half, 2 weeks before the 4th of July. The signs go up about the same time, and we know they're coming down shortly thereafter. So temporary, maybe by the code, technically they're in violation, but like you said, Dominique, we pretty much enforce health and safety. And as long as they're not impeding upon the sidewalk, as long as they're not blocking traffic view, it's not something that we would look at as a concern. We know they're going to come down in a few days.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're only up for 7 days. It's just 1 week. But the last thing I want to have happen is somebody complaining about my signs at the church. That's not what we want to be about. So if there are concerns, I just want to make sure that we are aware of them.
Sure, we would definitely let you know if a sign was going up for fireworks, you know, that was maybe a little too large or not in a good area. And we are really good about that. I mean, we haven't been receiving complaints regarding signage recently, but when we do, you know, get complaints regarding it, we take a look at it. We're not just calling the person and letting them know your sign's not in violation. We look at where the sign's located, take a picture. We actually do put some work into it, you know, review-wise, to determine what can be done. And so we're not just calling somebody and telling them, you need to take it down. We try our best to provide information to where they can keep that sign up, or maybe, you know, pick a different location for it or something. I mean, the extreme is complete removal. We do try to work with everybody that we can.
That's good. Appreciated.
So Diana and Dominique, if the enforcement level only happens at signs that are considered a life safety issue or non-compliant because they're in sidewalks or what have you. Wouldn't the better approach be to write a signage ordinance to address those issues instead of having a signage ordinance that's 25 pages long?
So for the most part, our municipal code does have that language in there that, not in the public right of way, not in violation of health and safety code or current ADA laws. I mean, that type of language is in there generally. And if that is how the planning commission agrees upon wanting to move forward and making amendments to the sign ordinance, then that's the direction we'll move in. As the city, we do want to provide flexibility to the businesses. It just makes it difficult when you're trying to provide for all of them. They are, different businesses. We've got different types of businesses. We've got the gas stations, we've got restaurants, dance studios, commercial signs, non-commercial signs, public interest signs. And so it does get a little tedious to where you'd like to have some type of direction on the type of sign. But maybe that's just, it's totally up to planning commission on what direction they want to go. And if we want to look at something much more simplified and not as long, we can definitely try to find a fits-all, and maybe that takes us, 6 months to a year to get there. But as long as we get there, at least we'd have that regulation in place. And I do know that there is a desire, all around to provide flexibility to the business, especially because we are a small town. We do have a lot of businesses that have been here for several years. We also have businesses that are new that we do want to see succeed. And especially with the situation we're in now with, the closing of businesses and basically the not knowing where everything's going to land, or how long this is gonna be like this. It's definitely not the greatest time, but we can still move forward with looking at items and discussing things to figure out exactly what direction we want to go in.
I can just
Wouldn't it be possible just to make a little flyer of the parts of the sign ordinance that apply? Because they already put up sheets inside the fireworks booth of do's and don'ts, and maybe the little flyer with how to advertise and what signage is appropriate would be something that we could just hand out to the winners of the booth.
Yeah, and so with for the most part, we might be able to provide some general requirements to specific types of businesses, like restaurant signs, liquor stores, gas stations. I'd have to double check and see if that would be possible for all uses. I guess it just depends. But that's definitely something that we could explore.
Yeah, a business maybe not so, because the sign ordinance would apply to them all the time. But like a fireworks booth that just comes into existence for a couple of weeks and then goes out, it seems like a guide sheet for people to operate it would be good.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think the ordinance probably is a little overwhelming. Maybe could be simplified a little bit, but certainly want to keep. Would think that that I would want to keep some sort of boundaries, just to be able to keep signage in check so it doesn't get out of control. I personally don't think it's out of control. I think how it's handled right now is working out fine. I wonder, given the code, the signage code, can staff comment on, do businesses come in and are they? I can't imagine you're getting overwhelmed with businesses coming in wanting to do these odd signs that are so radical that the answer's just no. It sounds like you work with a lot of them, and most of them are probably approved pretty close to as is. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, I had that item listed for our meeting at 7, but we have, in the last 5 years, we've only had 17 applications for signage, and 15 of them, for the most part, were approved. 2 or 3 of them, giving feedback or comments, and then they were able to adjust their signage to meet approval. and 2 of them being denied. And one of those being denied was much like what Marianne was talking about. They have a SSJID or a railroad easement where their sign is located, and so we were basically advised them that they should contact them, and see if they could obtain a letter for their sign, because upon our contacting of them, they were not willing to allow it to be there. So we told them, as property owner, you could try to talk to them and see if they'd be willing to let you do that, and that didn't move forward. To be honest, a lot of signage, unless we catch them as new commercial, like Arco comes in, we always encourage people to do their signage in their new commercial or new building applications, so that they go to planning commission or they go to council, they get their project approved, and if their signage is on there, it's all said and done, and, for the building or any monument signs or anything like that, we try to encourage that. A lot of places like to bid that out separately or maybe do it later on, as a deferred submittal or something like that. And that's where it gets a little harder. They might go ahead and do it without getting a permit. For the most part, the big businesses, the corporations in town, they know that they have to pull permits, and they'll come to the city to pull permits. It's a lot of the little businesses or the mom and pop businesses that are most likely not aware that a permit's needed. We have a few that contact us because they've probably had past encounters with staff, and are aware that we have regulations on them. But for any other of those, we're usually reaching out to them, advising that a permit's needed. And we do allow for people to apply for the permit even after the sign is up, and treat it, as an as-built, you can call it, or as submitted.
All joking aside, this is for city staff. All joking aside, we have a hard enough time trying to enforce fences and pergolas, let alone signs. And so a sign is much more permanent than a fence or a pergola. And I just see us opening ourselves to a whole big can of worms if we try to start enforcing signs throughout the city. I do have a question, but it's for Marianne, and it's completely off topic of signs, but in case it comes up, why is Escalon Covenant changing its name?
We actually left our denomination.
Okay.
So, and so we're just going in a different direction. So we're 100 years. We're actually celebrating the 100 years past and looking forward to the future. So, yeah.
Well, best of luck.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Just in case people say, why are they changing their name? It's good to know.
That's what it is. Nothing to hide. It's all good.
Got it.
Yeah.
I think I've beat this horse to death on how my thoughts are on this issue. I'll just mute my microphone for now.
Okay.
Dominique, can you hear me?
I can, Steve.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
For the businesses that there was some complaints on the signage, when you approached them, were they aware of what those regulations were that they weren't in compliance with? That's one question I have. And then the second question is when a new business comes into town and they apply for a business permit, does the city provide them with any sort of information on whatever our signage requirements are?
I think that was another area that we did explore. Currently, I do not believe we provide them with any information on the signage ordinance. And Diana, you can correct me if I'm incorrect.
We don't give them a copy of the sign ordinance when someone comes in to apply for a business license at a commercial location. We definitely have discussions with them about, well, you're taking over this commercial area, it's got the old sign on it, what are your plans? I just emailed a gentleman today who purchased commercial property in town. I emailed him the application for signage, I emailed him the ordinance. I let him know it's a little bit complicated for someone new to the signage to kind of figure it out, but just let us know what your plans are and we'll let you know if it meets the code and if we can assist them in any way. So we don't have a formal process for informing new businesses about signage, but it's certainly a conversation that we have with them when they apply.
Okay, and then the other question is you know, I haven't sat down and read the whole signage ordinance, but I mean, is this pretty self-explanatory, or do you need a PhD? Because I'm thinking if we're looking at making whatever changes to the ordinances, maybe we should look at making it more user-friendly for the people that this is going to apply to. So, like Marion, you know, he would have a better understanding or you know, idea on what he can do on his property with changing of the signs. Because it sounded like, Marion, that you weren't sure what you need to do to move forward. So that's telling me that maybe the sign ordinance is kind of difficult to muddle through to figure out what you can and cannot do.
Well, I'll comment on that because I did read most of the ordinance today, just bits and pieces as I was going through my day, but it was confusing. It is a little bit hard to try to figure out. That's why I had a lot of questions tonight. So, and I still have questions. So, but we can deal with that in the permitting process, I guess.
Yeah, but it would be helpful if it's if it's fairly self-explanatory on several levels. It would make it easier for the applicant to understand, and it's going to take less of the staff time to try to explain some things that are in the ordinance that maybe it's not really clear on what they're asking for. That's just kind of my input on this thing, and it kind of goes with Sean's on, let's see how we can make this more user-friendly to businesses, because, I mean, they're struggling.
Yeah.
They're struggling big time. And my other thought is, Escalon city limits is not that large, so if we are too restrictive on where we're placing signs, what's going to stop a business to go down 120 in the county and wreck something on somebody's property, or down McHenry, or up Escalon below the road? I mean, these are just some things that are popping into my head while I'm listening to these discussions here.
Okay.
I don't have anything else to say.
Are there any other business owners on the line that wanted to provide any feedback or concerns or ideas? Doesn't sound like it. Did anybody else have any other feedback, concerns, or ideas?
I guess what we're trying to say in a nutshell is, before we go through the whole process of amending sign revisions to the sign ordinance, I think what we need to consider is just having a one-page flyer of do's and don'ts for signs. And when somebody presents their building permit, if you will, then Diana or Dominique hands them this little one-page flyer about do's and don'ts for signage in Escalon, and it's much simpler. I mean, as you all know, I'm a construction manager, and this almost reminds me of a building code, and I get lost in the building code very easily. So it just seems like a lot of regulation for a little sign. So.
Okay.
In addition to that, in 96 and 97, we had a committee formed to look at the sign ordinance, and we had people from city staff, the planning commission, city council, and from businesses in town. And so they met and went over different sections at a time, and it was, instead of just being in legalese, it was put into language that everybody understood. And I wonder if we couldn't do that again. so it's not intimidating, either by length or by language. Is that an option, Dominique?
Sure, I mean, I can go back and see if I can find the sign ordinance prior to 2005. I'm not sure what amendments were made. We could actually be dealing with the sign ordinance that was created then.
Well, I'm thinking of getting buy-in from everybody. Maybe
Yeah.
if they get in on the examination of it, then they buy into it.
Okay, yeah. Any other feedback or comments anyone else has?
Commissioner Willis, do you still have a copy of that ordinance from 95 or 96?
I probably do, yeah. I have the paperwork, the attendance rosters and things like that. I'll look and see if I have the actual ordinance.
Okay, I think that would be a great starting point.
All right. With that, if there's no other comments, maybe we'll take a few minutes break, and we'll move over into our regular meeting at 7 p.m. and then we'll have Chair Castellano start that, and we'll just give me a few minutes to just get everything closed out and restart the tape, and then we'll get the meeting going. So let's do a 5-minute break, return back at 7:10.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marion, for coming.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be here. I don't know that, I'm probably not staying for the rest of the meeting, but